Okay, so you've shared this really comprehensive report with us, Australia's Economic Transition, a report on emerging structural challenges in 2025.
Quite mouthful.
It is, yeah. It digs pretty deep.
And our plan here, for everyone listening, is basically to pull out the really crucial bits for you. We're doing the sifting so you get the main takeaways on what's happening with the Australian economy right now.
Exactly. It's about getting under the hood, beyond just the news headlines.
To understand these big shifts the report talks about and, what they might actually mean down the track.
Yeah, because the report really does signal a kind of departure
Hmm.
from that long run of economic good times Australia had. It flags some serious pressure points.
What are the main areas we're going to look at?
Well, the big ones are housing affordability. That's a huge one. Then there's the general cost of living, household debt levels, Australia's reliance on China, economically speaking.
Right.
And then some longer term things too, like climate change impacts, the aging population, immigration, strains on education, healthcare, infrastructure. It's quite a list. It is a lot. Okay, let's dive in. First up, this idea that the good times, the miracle economy run, might be, well, running out of steam.
Yeah, the report talks about nearly 30 years of solid growth, often driven by resources, demand from Asia.
The long boom.
Exactly. But it argues that 2025 feels different, that the veneer of perpetual prosperity, as they call it, is starting to crack under various pressures, both internal and, global ones.
And the most obvious sign of that cracking veneer is?
Probably the housing affordability crisis.
Yeah.
It's just become so visible, so acute. The report suggests if we don't get a handle on this, it could really affect things like people moving for jobs, even, social harmony down the line.
Yeah, that statistic was pretty shocking. Only 14% of homes sold in 2024 were affordable for someone on the median income. That's about $112,000.
It's a massive drop. It used to be 43%.
43 down to 14, that's incredibly fast. So what's driving that? Is it just prices going up?
That's a big part of it, yeah. Median house prices have obviously climbed, but also rents. The report points out the national median rent hit $627 a week in early 2024,
Wow.
which is up 9% in just 3 years. So whether you're buying or renting, it's tough. And fundamentally, it comes down to supply not keeping up with demand.
Right, I saw the numbers on that. We built something like 180,000 homes when we needed closer to 240,000.
Yeah, that shortfall just makes the whole situation worse year after year. It feeds the price pressure.
And this isn't just about putting a roof over your head, is it? It ties into the broader cost of living pressures everyone seems to be feeling.
Absolutely. It's all connected. The report notes that, headline inflation, the main number you hear about, actually dropped to 2.4% by late 2024, lowest since early 2021.
So that sounds like good news.
On the surface, maybe. But if you look closer, services of inflation, things like getting your car fixed, childcare, insurance, that kind of stuff, that's still running really high, 4.6%.
Okay, so the everyday costs are still biting hard.
Exactly. And the problem is wages just aren't keeping up with that.
Yeah, the wage growth figure,
Okay.
3.5% in the year to September 2024. That was actually down from 4.1% before, right?
Correct. So costs for many things are rising faster than pay packets. And the result, the report calculates an 8% fall in real household disposable income over the last 2 years.
8% down. That's a serious squeeze on people's budgets.
It really is.
Yeah.
Especially when you compare it internationally. The OECD average over that same time was actually an increase of 2.6%.
So Australians are going backwards in real terms while others are generally holding steady or improving slightly. What happens if that continues?
Well, the worry is it dampens consumer spending, which is a huge part of the economy. It could also make inequality worse and just put more pressure on welfare systems.
And then you throw high debt levels into the mix.
Exactly. The report highlights how indebted Australian households are. Debt to GDP over 111%. Average mortgage around $666,000, or among the highest in the world.
Which makes interest rate rises really painful. And rates stayed high for a long time, didn't they? That 4.35% cash rate stuck around through most of 2024.
It did, only eased slightly to 4.1% in 2025. But that sustained pressure from high rates on those big mortgages, it really constrains household budgets.
And potentially limits how much the economy can grow overall, because people are just focused on paying the mortgage.
Yeah, it makes households very vulnerable to any shocks like losing a job, or if rates had to go up again for some reason. It definitely limits their ability to spend elsewhere.
Okay, so those are some big internal pressures. Shifting focus a bit, what about outside influences? The report flags the relationship with China pretty heavily.
It does. Huge reliance there. Exports to China hit a record $219 billion in 2023. That's almost a 32% of all our exports.
And it's very concentrated in certain things, right?
Huh.
Iron ore.
Massively.
Yeah.
Iron ore makes up nearly 60% of the volume going to China.
So while that's been great for revenue, it does create a pretty significant economic risk, doesn't it? Especially with, geopolitics being what they are.
Absolutely. Any big slowdown in China's economy or any major political fallout, that could hit Australian exports really hard, particularly resources.
Which means job losses, lower national income, the whole works.
Potentially, yes. And the report does mention efforts to diversify trade, looking more towards India, Southeast Asia, the U.S. But the reality right now is that the China exposure is still incredibly high. It's a tricky balancing act.
Definitely a long-term strategic issue. Okay, so moving beyond the immediate pressures, the report also delves into these deeper structural challenges. Climate change comes up first.
Yeah, and the potential economic cost there is pretty eye-watering. They estimate that delaying the shift to renewables could cost up to 14% of GDP annually by 2050.
14% per year. That's astronomical. Roughly $6.8 trillion over time, the report says.
It's huge, which is why steps like setting up the Net Zero Economy Authority in 2024 are framed as not just environmental necessities, but economic ones, too.
So inaction is basically far more expensive than action.
That's the argument, yes.
Yeah.
The costs of dealing with more extreme weather, industry disruption, it outweighs the investment needed for the transition.
Okay. Another big structural shift, demographics, the aging population.
Right. The projection is that the number of Australians aged 85 and over will double by 2042.
Double. That obviously puts massive pressure on healthcare, aged care, pensions.
Enormous pressure. It means higher government spending, potential workforce shortages in care sectors, and raises questions about how we fund it all.
And running alongside that, you have immigration policy trying to adapt. The report notes high migration numbers overall, but also these government changes, like raising the income threshold for skilled migrants.
Yeah, to $73,150.
Yeah.
And getting rid of some investor visas. The idea seems to be targeting skills we actually need, trying to align immigration more directly with labor shortages.
To boost productivity, I guess. While maybe trying to ease pressure on infrastructure.
That seems to be the goal. But speaking of infrastructure, the report says we're still playing catch-up there too, right? Even with big spending pledges.
Yeah, it mentions the $120 billion for transport, which is a lot. But it also flags gaps in things like digital infrastructure and social infrastructure, schools, hospitals.
And those are critical too. You can't have a modern, productive economy without reliable internet everywhere or without accessible education and healthcare. They're foundational.
The report also touches on tech adoption, saying it's a bit patchy, especially for smaller businesses.
Yeah, inconsistent uptake of new technologies and innovation among SMEs. And in today's world, falling behind on tech adoption really hurts competitiveness and productivity growth.
And one last factor the report mentions is political instability.
Yeah, it makes the point that frequent leadership changes, shifting policies, it just makes investors nervous. It erodes confidence for long-term planning.
Because businesses hate uncertainty, basically.
Yeah, exactly. It makes it harder to commit to big long-term projects if you think the rules might change next year. That can stifle growth.
Okay, so pulling all these threads together, affordability, debt, China, climate, demographics, infrastructure, politics. The report seems to frame the core challenge as tackling twin deficits. Affordability and adaptability.
That's the phrase they use, yeah. And it emphasizes that these aren't separate issues. They're all interlinked.
So the solutions need to be linked up too.
Precisely. It's not just build more houses. It's build more houses connected to jobs and transport. It's not just keep digging stuff up. It's shift towards a knowledge economy, innovate.
And redefine Australia's place in the world, focusing on resilience, diversifying trade, tackling climate change head-on.
Right. It's about moving beyond relying on favorable conditions, or, as the report puts it.
Yeah, I saw that closing line. The era of economic luck has run its course.
What follows must be an era of deliberate, strategic transformation. Pretty powerful summing up.
It really is. It paints a picture of a pretty significant turning point for the Australian economy. The easy ride, if it ever was easy, seems to be over.
I think that's the core message. The environment is just more complex now, more challenging, both at home and globally.
And the clear takeaway seems to be the need for some pretty fundamental, coordinated reforms. These aren't small tweaks around the edges.
No, it implies quite significant structural change is needed to navigate what's coming. and ensure prosperity continues.
Which leads to a really interesting question for everyone listening to mull over, building on everything we've just discussed from this report.
Yeah, thinking about all these interconnected challenges, housing, living costs, debt, China, climate, aging, tech, all of it.
Hmm.
If you had to pick one area of reform, just one,
What would be the single most critical focus point for ensuring Australia's economic success over the next decade?
and importantly, why is that one area so pivotal, especially considering how it interacts with all the other challenges we've laid out? Something to really think about.